In this video essay, I will be looking at the cuts to funding within addiction treatment in the UK. I will be looking into the government's new drug strategy and set of clinical guidelines that came out last year around treatment and evidence-based practice. I will also be questioning how this could affect the amount of roles for art therapists within this sector, and also how it could affect the most vulnerable people in society. The headlines in 2017 to date have been looking at the severity of drug-related death within the UK, with it being on record high for the past 3 years and the UK being dubbed the overdose capital of Europe. The Drug Strategy 2017 sets out how the government and its partners at local, national and international levels will take new action to tackle drug misuse and the harm it causes. The Home Secretary's forward acknowledges that there is a real need to go further and says the drug strategy sets out clear expectations. Its 4 main points are reducing demand, restricting supply, building recovery, and finally global action. The strategy also comes out with a set of detailed clinical guidelines. Collective Voice is a group of voluntary sector organisations that have responded to the drug strategy and have come together to represent the drug and alcohol treatment sector. They are optimistic with the strategy as it's focusing on the vulnerable, the leadership from the Home Secretary, focusing on clinical evidence and also the accountability of local authorities. I interviewed Alison Hill from Collective Voices to discuss the strategy and funding for treatment.
Okay, so the Recovery Partnership published a report at the end of last year giving a state of the sector of the drug and alcohol treatment sector, which essentially interviewed lots of different people in the sector, from commissioners to providers to people working on the ground, service managers, chief executives, and asked them essentially what they thought was going on in the drug and alcohol treatment sector. And very worryingly, we discovered that there are suggestions that the quality of treatment is under threat. So we've had 25% reduction in funding for drug and alcohol treatment since 2013, and this is beginning to have an impact because any efficiencies that could have been made seem to have been made already. And so we're sort of seeing in terms of quality of treatment, caseloads are up for drug workers, so that means obviously people have less one-to-one time with a specialist drug worker. A lot of the wraparound support is having to be scaled back, and there are indications that if we're not careful, we could essentially, drug treatment could become a glorified subscription service in the words of one commissioner.
Do you think the government's new drug strategy will improve treatment?
So it is encouraging to have this drug strategy from the government, because it shows that the government are interested in drug policy again and they're interested in treatment. And it is a very ambitious strategy. They set out some good aims, and one of their key aims is to increase the rates of recovery from drug and alcohol problems, which is encouraging. There's obviously the downside is that there isn't any money with the strategy, so it's all very well coming up with these lofty aims of improving treatment, but if that's not backed up by the resources, then it's going to be very hard for the sector to actually put it into practice.
In this article by The Guardian, it shows that drug fatalities are highest where there have been the most cutbacks. It was due to increased investment in the 2000s under the Labour government with joint commission with the NHS that treatment was most effective. So this raises questions as to whether local authorities being in charge of this ring-fenced grant are to blame for this epidemic, and if there will be more cuts in the future, and if so, how will this increase the risk for those with addictions?
In terms of the last few years, we've seen, as I said, 25% reductions in funding, and that's been happening year on year since 2013. So the way things are going, looks like we are going to get more cuts to funding. And there's a particular worry in April 2019, the ring fence comes off the public health grant, which means that then local authorities can then decide how much money they want to spend on public health. Particularly as you see, drug and alcohol treatment is not a top priority for many local authorities. They're very short of resources, they're having to make cuts across the board.
This is particularly worrying as the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs have warned ministers that not maintaining funding will not only increase drug-related death, but also blood-borne viruses and drug-related crime. They have also identified a mismatch between the clinical guidelines and the underfunded drug treatment system's ability to deliver.
So I think firstly that it's really great that we do have this really comprehensive, really evidence-based set of clinical guidelines which goes into a lot of detail, and is probably one of the best sets of clinical guidelines in the world. I mean, although obviously that doesn't quite match up with the levels of resources in the sector. I mean, it's important that the government is interested in drug and alcohol treatment, so they have taken the time to develop these guidelines and have endorsed them in the drug strategy.
The drug strategy also sets out that it wants more evidence-based practice in regards to treatment, especially within this complex and changing context. In the Arts and Psychotherapy Journal, in regards to substance abuse treatment, Elizabeth Holt and Donna Kaiser acknowledge art therapy as being a container for exploration and building internal motivation. It can also catalyse the external and internal processes which can create a lasting change in being abstinent. However, due to art therapy being a predominantly confidential process, could this mean that there will be now less roles for art therapy?
So I think it's important that practice is evidence-based, particularly in a climate where resources are scarce, and to make sure that the money that's being spent is being spent on evidence-based interventions, so that we know that the people being supported are getting the best possible support. However, that said, the clinical guidelines does recognise that a variety of interventions may need to be used, because obviously people are different, with different personalities in different situations, respond differently to different interventions, and so there's definitely space for more research into other interventions which could be effective.
I think it is imperative to fund and facilitate a variety of interventions, in particular for the older cohort of people with addictions, as these are the most vulnerable in society. Most recent figures from the ONS, which were published on the Collective Voice website, indicates that drug-related deaths in people in their 40s and over have doubled over the last 15 years. In the International Journal of Art Therapy, an article by Petra May Skeffington and Mandy Brown highlight that removing the familiar frameworks, for example talk therapy or a directive format, opened up space for change. They concluded that art therapy enabled clients who have suffered trauma and have complex needs need a non-threatening approach when it comes to addiction treatment.
So the drug strategy does recognise that there is this ageing cohort of people who started using mainly heroin back in the 80s and 90s. So they've had 20-30 years of heroin use, which has obviously had a massive detrimental impact on their physical health. But they've also, this group of people, very often have had poor mental health. They've had years of smoking, years of alcohol use, periods of street homelessness, poor mental health. So they have to deal with a whole range of issues, which mean that they are more susceptible to overdose, which is why we're seeing this massive spike in drug-related deaths. It's largely been driven by that group of people who are now in their 40s, whose bodies now are more susceptible to overdose due to the years of heroin use and other factors. And so engaging this population is going to be key if we want to see drug-related deaths go down. And also they are going to need probably more intensive support, and not just around their drug use but also around those other issues.
Another article in The Guardian relating to this interviewed Kevin Jeffrey, a former heroin addict, who believes that due to cuts to funding, that the more desperate you are, and if you have underlying mental health issues, which 75% of addicts do, you have less chance of getting the support you need, due to being a burden on statistics. He goes on to say that this is having an effect on the most chaotic people in the community. They are dying. The report also highlights that Middlesbrough, which has the highest level of heroin use in the UK and the third level highest of drug-related deaths in England, has also faced cuts of £1 million in the last year alone. Rachel Burns, who is Middlesbrough Council's health improvement specialist, said that they have realised savings by combining youth and adult services and housing all the substance misuse services into one building. I asked Alison if she knew of any other innovative ideas like this happening within the UK.
From the State of the Sector report, which is the Recovery Partnership released last year, there were some indications that there is some good innovation happening in the sector. So, for example, one service has chosen to go for a much more community-orientated and community-embedded approach, And so rather than having sort of say 6 drug and alcohol hubs around a local area, they instead only got 2 specifically for drug and alcohol, but then using other community settings such as libraries, community centres, DP surgeries, to reach out to other people, which means that it's obviously very good for outreach because you're going out to where local people are and you can bring more people into treatment that way. And obviously it cuts down on overhead costs if you're only having to support 2 hubs rather than 6.
I think it's important that innovation is happening and councils are finding new ways to adapt and save money, like joining up hubs and treatment services. However, there is only so much innovation and can be implemented within services and on a budget before it is spread too thinly and starts becoming less effective. Art therapists now have to develop more evidence-based research within this sector of addiction treatment if it's going to have a place within future centres at local level, despite private treatment centres valuing its use within its multidisciplinary approach. This problem surrounding evidence-based practice is, however, being recognised by art therapists. The book Time-Limited Art Psychotherapy looks at new strategies and developments from practicing art therapists and other practitioners in integrated psychotherapy in working within a time frame. This is due to the constraints in public services like the NHS and charities due to the lack of funding and the increased people needing art therapy. Neil Springham, who has worked and researched in addiction treatment using art therapy, developed his own time-limited therapy within this setting based on congruence with the organisational aims, and I believe this is something to value and think about in the future of art therapy in this climate. He goes on to say that the future research will help us find new ways to practice to better help those who come to art psychotherapy for help. The main point is without increasing the funding altogether, the risk it has on the many lives who have addictions and the sector's ability to help and deliver a successful treatment program is impossible and dangerous. The funding must be increased so that the government can actually implement their drug strategy and their clinical guidelines. The cost to not do so is too high. So in conclusion, the funding cuts have had a massive effect on the quality of treatment, and the drug strategy cannot be implemented until this changes. Art therapists have already started to research and develop their practice in this constantly evolving and complex sector, and will continue to promote art therapy as a way of bridging the gap with complex clients. It will be interesting to see where this moves forwards, as with an effective program for addiction treatment, we can improve communities, reduce crime, and ultimately save lives.